first year, fun, exciting city. What are some implications for us being there? How can we have some real dialogue around one of the social issues which, in our minds, is human trafficking, sex trafficking in the city? And so we want to do a program session like this where we can just create space to talk, but also engage people in the community who are already doing the work, not pretending like you know everything. So I'm going to introduce two guests that we have today who are doing the work, know the topic that kind of teach us more, educate us more about what's going on. But also to be able to take these conversations, plant some seeds. We can't cover it all in an hour, clearly. It's a huge topic, but plant some seeds, we can go back to our own communities, campuses, and have the conversation with colleagues and students there. In the spirit of applying what we're learning, we do have a service project component at the end of the program. So about the last 15 minutes, we hope you can stick around and be a part of that. And the more people that stick around, hopefully, the more we can do, the bigger impact the service project can have. All right? So without further ado, I'm going to actually introduce our guests. And I actually turn some stuff off. I'm sorry. I wanted to give them due credit for all they do. So first, Dr. Alexis Kennedy is an associate professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. She completed her PhD in forensic psychology in 2004. A former lawyer, she has successfully integrated these two professional foci in her research agenda, examining sexual exploitation. She has published on child abuse, sexual assault, exploitation, prostitution, internet crime, and negative body image. Her doctoral dissertation on cross-cultural perceptions of child abuse won 2 American Psychological Association awards and a Canadian Psychological Association laureate award. She has received grants to study crime in Clark County and led a number of task forces. A recognized expert on sexual exploitation, she has testified in court, spoken about the United States, and has been quoted frequently in the media. She sits on a number of nonprofit boards helping to develop new community programs for high-risk youth. So Dr. Alexis Kennedy. Also, we have Mike Bartell. Mike Bartell is the co-founder and director of Free International, an organization that's dedicated to educating the public on human trafficking, sex trafficking, doing research and advocacy work for victims. Doing outreach and advocacy work for victims of human trafficking and their families. Mike has a master's degree in religious studies from Missouri State University. He worked in student affairs for several years, including at Purdue University before starting here. So these will be our 2 guests today. I'm going to invite Dr. Kennedy up, and she'll be followed by Mike Bartell, and then I'll be so give them another.
I don't know. I'm trying to use the mic not being too loud. So, oh, there we go. Learning outcomes. Yes, I'm sort of the typical academic that I think my research area is infinitely more important than anything else in the world. Because I come from child abuse, and when I landed in Las Vegas 8 years ago, having a history of studying child abuse, sexual abuse, exploitation through prostitution, needless to say, I'm very, very busy here in Las Vegas, so there's no shortage of things to do. But what makes me different, I think, as an academic, is that I'm very passionate about making a change, and so I engage students as much as I can. I get them out in the community doing interview. I get them to roll up their sleeves and actually talk to the kids that we've been studying, and it really does change their lives. So when we do the service learning, I wanted to introduce Chelsea Garvin, who's one of my former students, who was also an academic advisor when she was a grad student. So she knows all about trying to engage students and the difference in their interest levels. But she took her master's in criminal justice and ended up working for one of our leading service providers in town, actually managing the girls that are sexually exploited. So she's got great stories about how difficult it is to work with them and try and help them sort of navigate back into the straight life after being in this very grown-up world that is Las Vegas. And so it is, I mean, I'm talking a little bit about Las Vegas because we are sort of the epicenter of prostitution here in Las Vegas. I realize I don't have the link. We'll see if we can do the link later. Can we post that link? Amber Lyon from CNN did a great expose where she put a picture of herself up as a 14-year-old in an ad for prostitution, and she was doing it, I think she was in Atlanta when she did it. The point is, children being pulled into prostitution is in every single city in the United States, from towns. If you're big enough to have a college or a university, you've got back page ads and sexual exploitation going on. Las Vegas, being an expert in prostitution, Las Vegas is a bit like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, you guys have all arrived, it's in your face, it's the billboards, it's the flippy cards as you walk between buildings. We just have it on a completely different level here. And it is, some people are sort of wondering, Nevada's sort of the black eye in terms of talking about prostitution because we have the legalized prostitution, but that's out in a couple of counties with low populations. So prostitution is illegal here in Las Vegas. It's illegal in Reno. It's illegal in our capital city, Carson City. but really what you're seeing here is that illegal prostitution that's the same as in Atlanta or New York or Boston or Los Angeles or Seattle. I mean, it is in every single city. And even in the small cities, where it's moved now has moved to the back pages and to, used to be Craigslist, but they shut down their adult sites. No longer do you need to know where the stroll is or have any sophistication on how to get customers. You simply post an ad that says, my room number is, room 22 at the budget suites, come, I'm available, we're open for business. The pimps will post the ads, the kids will post the ads, and you set up shop, you're earning money through prostitution. So it's a very complicated world that we're struggling with because prostitution is illegal. We tend to look at the people selling sex as criminals. We arrest them for prostitution. But for the kids in particular, the ones who are under 18, we don't know what to call them anymore because they are victims. We recognize that children under 18 shouldn't be employed in the sex industry. And I put that in quotation marks because we do have legal venues. But if they're under 18, federally we've designated them as victims, but in every single state what we do is we arrest them and pull them into the delinquency system because that's the only way we know how to take care and control of them and to try and intervene. So there's no such thing as a child prostitute. You can't choose to be a prostitute when you're a child, but the names that we're using that are more sensitive are also really a big mouthful. So domestic minor sex trafficking victims is one that you'll hear because when we made the big movement in 2000 to recognize that the U.S. is a consumer of prostitution, that we have international trafficking coming into the United States, we have people working in really abominable conditions all over the United States in sort of lockdown brothels, labor trafficking, all the different types of trafficking, there was this movement that kind of went, well, wait, what about our local people? What about U.S. citizens who are working in that as well? So in 2005, we broadened our definition of trafficking to include the children that are, or adults that are forced, fraud, and coerced into prostitution. But as you can see, we have so many names. The way we manage these kids still is the same in every state. They are delinquents, we arrest them, we put them in the jumpsuits, we process them through the delinquency system. And in Las Vegas, we arrest 150 to 250 children every year for prostitution. And we've been doing it that way since 1994. We've had hundreds of kids every year. Because this is big business, we are in a lot of ways the epicenter of prostitution. A lot of people in Las Vegas don't like being singled out as being the epicenter of prostitution in North America, but my comment is, I hope it's not worse anywhere else. Portland actually recently has been talking about how they're #1 for prostitution. I don't know why they've taken such pride in that, so we can debate it. But the reality is it doesn't matter how we rank, we all have this going on in our communities, and we have to figure out how to identify and raise awareness. The thing about prostitution, whether it's adults or children, is they start as children. So if you've got, sometimes you're going to have college students who are working their way through college in illegal prostitution. They didn't start that at 18. There's going to be something in their past, a past history of sexual abuse, family dysfunction, an adult, an older boyfriend, somebody convinced them to do it. They start as children because it's not one of our career fair booths at our career fair on campus. Be a prostitute. And even here in Las Vegas where we have the legal brothels outside of town, it's not something that we can recruit healthy young adults, men or women, into. There's something about that family dysfunction and that young age that starts them into that. This is just a map to show the kids that are arrested here in Las Vegas come from all over the United States, and so, except the Dakotas for some reason. But we capture all of your kids, because when kids run away, when they hop on a Greyhound bus, when they meet a guy online who says, come spend the weekend with me, they buy a Southwest ticket and meet them at the airport here in Las Vegas. And when you leave Las Vegas at the airport, take a look around at the way everybody's dressed and the way the interactions are happening. Every weekend, we have an influx of kids coming in to work and adults coming into work, and when the conferences are over, they leave. So this is part of having this city with this high amount of tourism. Every big convention, the worst is January, because we have the Consumer Electronics Show and the Adult Video Network happening at the same time. And the economy behind it is a multi-billion-dollar illegal industry here in Nevada. And it is the tourists that are coming for the conference that also sort of fuel it. But it's our local kids, it's international kids, it's national kids. It's everybody's problem, it's everybody's issue, even though we're sort of left with the mess in a little bit. But I just wanted to sort of part of what I do, I tell stories that nobody wants to hear, so I get up and talk. I'm always grateful that you're listening, because people don't actually want to hear these details, because the stories are really kind of unbelievable, how some kids are living in the United States now. And they're not the kids we see on campus, because the kids on campus, I mean, they come from a really diverse background, but they've made it through life, and they've made it to school. And I mean, we've got, you know, some outstanding kids who come from pretty bad backgrounds, but for the kids who really get sucked into the criminal activity, the CPS system, the delinquency system, they don't make it to the sort of straight life of college and jobs and the normal sort of procedure. So it's important to talk about what these kids look like when we do identify them. And for my grad students and I interviewed the girls that had been arrested in Las Vegas over a 6-month period. We interviewed 161 girls, and only about 20% of them had been arrested for prostitution-related crimes. But when we started talking to them, a third of them started describing their work in prostitution. So even if they're arrested for vandalism or fighting with their parents or the other sort of minor things we tend to pick girls up on. Once they built that rapport, they started talking about their sex abuse. And when you look at the kids that are delinquents when they start running away, we'd expected a history of them running away, but what's amazing is the age they first run away at, because nearly 40% were under the age of 12, or an 11-year-old runs away in Las Vegas. Where do they go? They can't get a job, they can't rent an apartment, they can't get a cell phone. They head down to the Strip, because all bus routes lead to the Strip. Or they head to the Greyhound station because they want to hop a bus and go to Grandma in Wyoming or whoever they think is their safe place. And the pimps find them. There's these adults who are there looking for them, often a place to stay, and pull them into this very dangerous and strange world that is sexual exploitation. The kids that we see in detention are abused. We expect them to be abused, but I compared the ones that got involved in prostitution to the ones who didn't. And the ones that got sucked into sort of the prostitution were just a little bit more abused than the kids. But all the kids in delinquency, 57% were emotionally abused, 40% were physically abused. They have a history of sexual violence as well, either long-term child sex abuse or being raped at some point. So 3 out of 4, and these are kids that are just sitting across from a researcher that they don't know at all. The fact that 3 out of 4 were comfortable disclosing the abuse, if we had sort of a therapeutic relationship, we'd probably have even higher numbers. But the kids that have been, hanging out in this grown-up world of sitting at the bar, sitting at the tables, sitting at the slot machines, trying to pick up adults to have sex with, they really recognize that this is a tough town to be a kid in. There's something qualitatively different about living in the adults' playground that is Las Vegas, that is the Disneyland for adults. I described it to my kids when we first moved here. But again, I don't want to just focus on Las Vegas, because this is happening in every single city. One of the things we know is that once they get involved in sleeping with adults and getting paid for sex acts and things, is that they are doing very high-risk sexual activity. They're engaging in sex without protection, without a condom. Half of them have been pregnant, so this is, we can look at it from the high-risk health behavior perspective. What's amazing is their average age of first sexual experience. So, this is 50 girls. Their average age was 12. That means that there was something in their past that introduced them to sex that affected their sort of boundaries at an early age. Another way to put it is asking if we look at the entire, high-risk CDC sexual behavior study for the U.S., about 4% of our girls are sexually active at 12 or younger. But when you look at the delinquent kids, 30% were, and almost half of our kids pulled into prostitution, so that's 12 and younger. So there's something different about starting your sexual activity that early. The other things they're doing is you're hanging out with adults, you're in this illegal world, there's drugs going around. Not that we have drugs in Las Vegas, we tend to not talk about that, but you can buy or get anything in this town. It's not hard, so not that I was advertising, go out and party that hard. But really, when you talk to these kids, the fact that, over half of them used cocaine, a quarter of them are like, yeah, I've used crack, over half had used crystal meth, 1 in 5 are saying I've used heroin. That's really high-risk grown-up behaviors. So, and these are the kids sitting in detention that we interviewed that we're saying are delinquents, straighten up, fix your life, go back to mom, go back to school, get back on the regular path. If we don't understand the complexity of the world they've been living and the activities they've been doing, it's hard to change that. I don't know if this is hard, if you can see this. This is from one of the leading training organizations, My Life, My Choice, out of Boston. When they talk about it, everyone wants to know, well, who's going to get pulled into this world? What are the risk factors? The risk factors are kind of useless because they represent every single teenager. You know, they have access to a computer, they fight with their parents, they want to be loved, they feel misunderstood, they want independence. Well, that's every single teenager. But that is what the adults in prostitution, the pimps and the boyfriends who pull them in, swoop in and offer them. It's, you're beautiful, you're fabulous, come live with me, you don't have to go to school, you don't have to follow any rules. They paint this really pretty picture that draws these kids in. And we as adults, when we're trying to fish them out the other end, are kind of going, well why? Why did you do this? The lure that the adults use to pull them in is something very powerful to the teenage girls. And once we realize how truly violent their lives are, I mean, not only are they not in school, they're not in the straight world, they're having to, have sex with all these strangers 10 to 15 a day, 7 days a week. And then we look at the adults that are, renting the hotel rooms for them, posting the ads on back pages, the pimps. We'll sort of say, why would you stay with this guy when he's so awful to you and really exploiting you this way? The way to understand it is to look at it in terms of the what we understand now about emotional abuse and domestic violence. Because 20 years ago, we look at women who'd come up at the hospital beat up and say, well, why don't you leave him? He's going to kill you next time. What's wrong with you? These are two classic quotes from our domestic violence research saying that the victims really minimize the violence. They love the person they're with. They want to fix them. It was their fault. They burnt dinner. They did something wrong. The kids that are living with these adults that are exploited through prostitution, they really are bonded, strongly bonded with these men, primarily men, who are abusing them, and they want to fix them. They don't call them a pimp. If you say to a kid, you have a pimp, no, they don't. But, we have all these 15-year-olds in Las Vegas and have 35-year-old boyfriends, and that's when we have to sort of say, okay, so tell me about your boyfriend. Well, he's a music producer from LA, and he's going to make me famous, and you're like, okay, does he have a job? No, he's between jobs right now, and so how do you pay the rent? Well, I'm paying the rent, but it's just temporary. They have these great fantasies that are built around these really usury, often quite smart and definitely violent adults that are using these kids through prostitution. So, Chelsea, I'm sure you've got stories of all of the dreamy boys in town that are really men using the kids. So, in looking at children being pulled into prostitution, and maybe even looking at maybe adults that you're managing at universities who seem to be changing quickly, you start to notice that they're acting differently. All of a sudden they've hung out with a new crowd. I don't know how much you'll be doing in terms of identifying your own college students, but it's something that really could happen to anyone, and it normally happens in middle school and high school that they get pulled into prostitution, but it can happen at the college level. I know some of the research that we were doing, kids head off to college, they're on their own for the first time, all of a sudden they run out of money or they can't go home the same way. They will turn to, this very grown-up and dangerous world of prostitution to earn money. But when you look at them and what was their path that got them there, you almost find this history of child abuse, because there's something about having your first sexual experience at age 11 or having family members or friends who abused you, being assaulted in high school. It affects how you feel about your body. It changes this idea that you can get attention for either positive or negative for engaging in sexual acts, and it's having your sort of personal boundaries violated at a young age that makes it easier for people to engage in prostitution. They sort of already know abuse, it's something that's comfortable to them. That sort of precursor is there. It's not causal, obviously, because we have a lot more people who are abused as children than we do end up in prostitution. But when you look at the kids and the adolescents that are in prostitution, there's that really strong connection between, the guilt and shame of having been an abuse victim, seeing themselves as a sexual object. Often it'll start with high-risk sexual activity, trading sex for a place to stay, trading sex for drugs, just sleeping with a bunch of people to make your new boyfriend like you. And it doesn't start commercial, it starts with that sort of casual sexual behavior, and then eventually it will morph into that commercial where you're actually exchanging it for money. And then often, even when you talk to adults in prostitution, they could have been arrested 40 times and they won't necessarily say they're a prostitute. They're just someone who is having sex with lots of people and occasionally they give them money. They very much downplay it. It's not, again, that sort of career where you introduce yourself at the Parent-Teacher Association, I am a prostitute. And but yet people are surviving and using this illegal industry for financial reasons throughout the country. But for the kids who run away at a young age, have that history of dysfunction, want to be loved, want someone to notice them, want someone to appreciate them, they very much are targets for the pimps and the adults that pull them, the traffickers that pull them into prostitution. And part of the reason why they get pulled in is that we don't talk about pimps very much. We have this sort of veneer of, we've got Ice-T and Snoop Dogg and a few sort of famous rappers that were like, oh, behold, they're pimps. And it's a bit of a joke. We don't talk about the true violence. I mean, my students still quote Pretty Woman as an example of prostitution. It's not real. It's an old movie now. Even Richard Gere is starting to show cracks. It's just not the real world. And that's part of our responsibility, is to be really honest about the industry and honest about the players behind it. So, red flags, I wonder, are you gonna, it's like, no, keep talking, keep talking. This is the stuff that people find the most useful, because it may not be, this is what we need to get the word out in terms of, educating students who are interested in this issue, who want to stop this issue, educating teachers in particular who are working with middle school, older kids. What is it about a kid acting differently that should be a red flag, that they're hanging out with a different group of people and they might be engaging in this really high risk behavior? It's risky to them physically, bodily, it's risky to them emotionally, it's risky because they're hanging out with these adults doing very grown-up things. So some of the red flags that we have, and this you could apply to college students as well, they will have the signs of abuse. They'll have bruises, they're in bad relationships. I don't know how much, I don't think we talk enough, even on college campuses, about domestic violence and intimate partner violence, sexual assault. I mean, it's a huge risk factor. Your first year of college, you've got a whole new peer group. The person you're closest to is the one you stood in line in the first class. You know that person well because you've known them for 2 weeks as opposed to the person you met tonight. It's a really tricky time to maneuver in terms of who is your support and who to trust. So, understanding how to teach kids to negotiate that, to have healthy relationships, to avoid domestic violence, that all overlaps with all forms of abuse. She has behaviors consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, so all of the clusters, sleeplessness, skittishness, change, being preoccupied. You notice a change in her physical appearance. We see this where all of a sudden they'll change the way they dress. They're wearing short skirts, they're wearing high heels, they're starting to try and emulate a sort of new, the look in the videos, the stuff that's all of a sudden they went from being a good girl to looking very grown up. You'll see that transition almost overnight. A lot of the girls that we have in town have tattoos because that's part of the pimp culture. They want to mark their girls. So the tramp stamp at the lower back, that actually originated with pimps. That was where they would mark their girls so that you'd know who owned her, because you'd only see it when they were naked. But now it's like the college thing and everybody's got tramp stamps. So, but if it says, one of my favorite ones was from Boston, it's like Daddy's Little Moneymaker across the neck. That might be something you ask questions and say, really? Tell me a little bit about that tattoo. But the pimps will tattoo their names across their breasts, across their very obvious places to know they're being branded essentially. They spend an inordinate amount of time online. Again, that's sort of all teenagers. That's all kids from 5 and up now. But it's for parents who are trying to figure out what's going on. They no longer want their parents to see what they're doing. We were just talking about all the kids that get rearrested because they can't stay off of Facebook. They want to be on Facebook even when they've been arrested and told not to be on Facebook. They appear exhausted. Kids that are, and again you see this in college, they're partying every night, every Friday night, Saturday night, missing classes because they can't get out. But that is something that we see in the high school and the younger kids, that there's something changed in their life, that they're spending a lot of time out at night. If they have multiple pagers or cell phones, really most of us only need one phone. Some of us have a work phone, home phone, but if you've got adolescents, young adults that are having multiple cell phones, that's a red flag. If they use language from the life, so talk about daddy instead of boyfriend and start talking very grown up. The trouble is we don't know what it is that they're saying half the time. UrbanDictionary.com, do you guys all know about that? Best website ever. So I'm constantly on there looking things up going, oh, okay. And I can still get shocked, which is good because I know far too much about this stuff. So I like that I still go on and go, really? They need a name for that? So so sometimes it's the verbiage that we see. If they're involved in a male who's a lot older, who's not a college student, who's not a high school student, who's somewhere where you're kind of going, I don't get that coupling, that's sort of something to start asking questions. If they have a history of multiple STIs and or pregnancies, if they're truant from school a lot, this is more truant, more the high school. if they have unexplained absences from their home or residential program, if they have an interest in pornography or other parts of the sex industry. I mean, you'll have one kid who's, you know, the one trying to shock everybody else and playing really graphic stuff and, you know, talking big. Sometimes it's worth asking the questions to find out why they're trying to, you know, bring their friends into this sort of area. If they have new friends, you'll see that kids all of a sudden switch. They leave one peer group and they've got a new peer group that they're working with, that hanging out with, that you sort of say, well, what happened to so-and-so? How come you don't, you know, show up and eat dinner with her anymore or hang out with her anymore? You'll start to notice that they've switched peer groups. If they're disconnected from their family or their caregivers, the thing about kids pulled into prostitution, and some of the girls that I've seen that are in college, is that once they have that man in their life, it's like domestic violence. They become socially isolated from their other peer groups. So holidays come and they stay in residence. They're not going home to their family anymore. They've sort of changed their group of friends. You'll notice that because they'll be there at odd times or different times. If they've lost interest in age-appropriate activities, so all of a sudden they drop out of clubs or teams or things that they used to do because they just want to spend time with these adults in their life. So the screening question, I mean, this can be used with children, it can be used with adolescents. Sometimes you've got someone that you're working with and you know that something's off. You can see the cracks forming, you can see this huge change. You know that there's something different and you're not sure what it is. Sometimes they'll be more likely to talk about their exploitation than their bond with the pimp or the other, maybe even their interpersonal violence that they're experiencing. You can ask the question, has anyone ever asked you to exchange sex for money, food, or a place to sleep? Sometimes we get disclosures starting when we talk to a girl and we'll say, you know, is everything okay? Has someone asked you to do something you're not comfortable doing? And they'll talk about how their boyfriend they thought was one thing has asked them to sleep with their friends or told them they have to do this to prove their love to them. And that, rather than assault, because they did it willingly, the person asked them to do it, that will be the conversation that will start the disclosure and the talking about what's going on and what they're facing. So even now, I teach victims of sex crimes, and it's my class, my content material that triggers a lot of my senior students, and they'll come to me and come to my office and close the door and say, I've never told anyone this, but you know, my high school boyfriend made me do this, or my college boyfriend makes me do that. And then it will, once I start with that exploration, then you get into all of the different types of victimization that they've experienced. But we need to identify the right now interpersonal violence, the danger they're in. Maybe they need a restraining order, maybe they need help getting out of that relationship and away from that person that's using them to make the switch to someone else. So, you're gonna post this, is that right?
Yeah.
There's 2 video links that are really excellent, so we'll make sure that those video links go up. One is YouTube. It has, GEMS is one of the best advocacy groups for children and adults working in prostitution, and they have this great little 4-minute video called The Making of the Girl that explains what it is these pimps and these adults offer these kids to get them to run away from home, to get them engaged in this life. And the other one is the CNN Amber Lion, because the thing that we're missing often is the voice of the consumer, these adults who are walking up to our kids and walking up to our young adults and offering them money. It's really kind of shocking, the language behind that. So Amber's piece is only like 2 minutes and it's on CNN site, but we need to hear how these adults are using our young people. So that was fast, I know. But I'll hand it over to talk about how do we raise awareness.
What was this? What was the CNN?
Amber Lion,
Amber
it's
Lion.
selling the girl next door. I think we'll have the link put up.
That's excellent stuff, and I don't know how much time she ever has, but you know, I'm sure she's free to travel to all your campuses, full day workshops and all this. It's great stuff. When we talk about this issue of trafficking, and I've been involved hands-on since well, for the better part of 9 years now. We started our work in Southern Asia, working throughout India and Sri Lanka and Nepal and all those places in the red light districts, and primarily with an organization that dealt with developing shelters and aftercare programs for those who were coming out. And then my wife and I came back, having traveled the country to campuses and other places where we trained, we did all that stuff beyond raising awareness, technical issues, you know, training nursing programs at University of North Carolina, or you know, criminal justice at whatever the university is, you know, in New Jersey. In doing that, we kept hearing, you know, this is great. We know this is happening now more and more overseas, but what can we do about it here? What does it look like, you know, on our home turf? Whether that's sex trafficking, which I think is emphasized rightly, but a lot of times we miss that labor trafficking side of this too, and going into the bad economy like we've had, we've seen actually a growth in labor trafficking things. And campuses can have a big role in that. This is kind of an aside for what I was going to say, but in that particularly, Bono always says, hey, shopping is politics, right? And we've seen that a lot over the last year, whether, you know, that deals with whether we buy chicken from a certain chicken store because of how they believe a certain way or not. But the reality is, you know, where we put our money, where we put our emphasis really does benefit, you know, great businesses like Travelocity, Sabre Networks, who started to emphasize human trafficking and training all their employees, you know, to emphasize and make your purchases at that location. College students are really good at elevating that, as opposed to other groups that are willfully ignorant about the supply chain and where their products come from, which increases the amount of trafficking that goes on. But when we came back to the United States, it was to start Free International, which stands for Find, Rescue, Embrace, and Empower. And the intent of what we were doing with Free International, again, was not only do we need to raise awareness, but how do we move from an understanding of an issue into an engagement or making an impact on that issue? You heard Dr. Kennedy a few times say, hey, we're talking about Vegas, but this is in all our communities, right? So how do we not only elevate that in an educational format, but engage it? Because we all know, especially with the backgrounds we all have, that talking about something does nothing to impact it. There's certain areas that it can. In our high schools and junior highs and at these younger ages, when you can pull the veil down as to what these lies are that the pimps, that the exploiters bring in, you can prevent a lot of it from happening. So talking in that setting is very valuable. But as it pertains to the backside, we need to know what this issue looks like so we can have an effective way to engage it in our local community context. I'm going to be in North Dakota this weekend. I've been up there a few times over the last few months. North Dakota has this big oil boom going on up there, second largest oil producing state in the country right now. And with that, towns that were 10,000 people 2.5 years ago are now 40,000 people, primarily male, coming into an area. You know, we're not maybe finding Dakota girls here, but when I'm monitoring online, we see a lot of here girls in North Dakota right now, flying out on Allegiant and the Minot and all these places, working the oil fields out there. And then obviously in the schools there, a lot of those girls who have ambitions beyond the local farm community they grew up in are becoming more and more vulnerable to what's going on out there as well. So when we came back, it was with that in mind. We knew everywhere we traveled, people wanted to begin to engage. So not only did we want to elevate this as an issue and talk about it, but we want to, in a collaborative, creative way, find effective ways that local communities, campuses, college towns, rural communities, where the truck stops are in Indianapolis, wherever it was, to be able to effectively engage it. And we'll also say this, and I think, I won't speak for her, but I would assume, you know, talking about an issue for an hour and then coming out of that session and going, here's what we're going to do about it, that's a big step from here to there, right? So to have a nice process to, okay, how are we going to raise awareness on our campuses, in our faith communities, in our schools, whatever it is, but begin to put right human resources on the table to be effective in a community. And that's what Free's been trying to do for the last few years. You know, the first thing we want to be able to do is find those who are being exploited. If they're in every community, what does it look like? You see a picture of it here in a sex trafficking sense. You know, we could get into it in a labor trafficking sense as well. So we began to partner with strategic organizations in different communities who showed an interest in this, to be able to find the resources, human resources available to begin to address it in the community. One of the major things we've done is we've been doing Super Bowl outreaches for the last 5 years now as part of a collaborative endeavor. And we've seen college students really jump in with that. When we jumped in the Miami Super Bowl, one of the main ways that we began to connect the dots with a community that was very effective is take the missing kid approach to communicating what's going on, right? This issue of trafficking, it's big, it's complicated, it's hard to wrap your mind around, it's hard to understand, it's hard to accept, knowing the culture we come out of, that this is happening. But everybody understands a missing kid face, right? They understand the vulnerability of that, they understand what's going on. So we started by printing missing kid books working with national missing kid organizations, Class Kids, which is one of the organizations we primarily partner with, to be able to elevate the conversation into the motels and the tattoo parlors and the Dollar General stores in an area of a big event like the Super Bowl, so that we can mobilize in a public way people who not only can learn about an issue, but begin to build relationships into these businesses, so that when kids go missing, when things are happening right on the doorstep of these motels, now we can recognize what it is, identify it, and create a funnel to which to flow that information. Best case scenario, like in Miami, we had a college group working with us. A group of about 4 went into a motel down on the ocean, great motel, talking about the missing kids. 2,200 kids go missing, are reported missing every day. Statistics, whatever those say within 48 hours, a pimp, a trafficker, somebody who's opportunistic and exploiting will have already approached these kids. 72 hours, that goes up to 2/3, right? I mean, again, a 13-year-old on the street has limited options, right? So all of a sudden, a lot of other things come into play. So with that in mind, we build these connections. So we're talking to this one motel, this college group is, they're making those connections with the concierge up at the front. When the owner of the motel leaves, the concierge quietly, in about 8 seconds time, gives the name of the pimp, the age of the girls, and what time they'll be back at the motel, and he walks away, right? So we have this real solid process of taking this information. We're not vigilantes, so we work heavily with law enforcement, especially around these big events like that. This last year in New Orleans, we worked directly with the FBI and the state police of Louisiana, did their online research for them, Backpage, all these other places, to be able to identify maybe kids that were missing that we were looking for, as well as begin to have kind of some expertise on the street to identify what's going on. But not being vigilantes, we don't do the intervening, we don't snatch and grab, we work in direct collaboration with law enforcement to be able to get those kids out. But sure enough, we documented it, worked with Miami Vice, and that night they showed up 5 minutes after the time the guy gave us. Pimp was there, 2 girls were with him. Pimp's still in prison to this day. Girls got out, got help through some great programs we collaborate with. Collaboration is a huge need in any area, but especially this area. You need great expertise, like we're hearing, in this training. Practitioners who day to day know what's going on with these girls, and be able to decipher the story being told, understanding the language, and the help that's needed. So if we want to begin to do that within communities, how do we find those who are being exploited? Beyond just the trainings, which we've done all over the country, how do we find collaborative, creative ways to engage in a community in a positive way? I got a few other things we did in the find aspect of this. This is one of the girls we were looking for down in Louisiana this last year. We decided, this was actually my son who's 11 years old, this was his idea. Actually, we had been talking about creating, if you've seen the card slappers downtown here, a way that we could put some public volunteers alongside to look for missing kids that we believe are likely in the area, but have some red flags on the back to be able to talk about, even if you don't see this missing kid, here's kind of the connection between these girls you're looking at. Because we're in the process of counseling and working with some girls who were the backside of that phone number you're going to get on the strip, who were put out by their own husbands or whatever and trafficked that way. And so this worked. We put up over 40,000 of these missing kid cards, 2,500 of the missing kid books in New Orleans. The cards went out into the hands of the people on the streets. Out of that book, to this point, we have over 20 of the missing kids have now been recovered over the course of that time. And it's because the faces of the girls are in front of people, the dots are connected, and a flow of information was given so that those who do the work of law enforcement, can step in and do what they need to do. We were getting immediate tips from this, and it worked really well. Well, the football card idea was my son's idea. He goes, hey, you're going to the Super Bowl, like my football kit. Why don't you put it on that? And we found it worked really well. Again, these are effective ways that we can get our students involved in a community to begin to connect with the businesses in the area and raise the level of awareness of what's going on. When we worked the Indianapolis Super Bowl, the NFL host committee gave us access to all the motels they associated with. So we had almost 250 motels that we were interacting with and training how to recognize the vulnerable right on their doorstep. With that fine component, and again, where we begin to emphasize, even on campuses, point out commerce-wise where the best companies are, we begin to address those things that they need to address. Travelocity Sabre Network was one of those groups. Last year, they had their conference here. We came in and we trained, like Dr. Kennedy did a little soap project, like you're gonna do in a minute or two here. And when we got into Indianapolis, all those motels, all those businesses wanted to help once they connected what was going on with what was happening in front of them, right? And so, and this is no exaggeration, when we were doing our direct outreach, we'd float into some of these motels throughout the week. You never saw somebody who wasn't working the front desk or whatever, not thumbing through this book, you know, to see those kids, to see what's going on. Now, if that's a way we are gauging the community, it's also something we're very mindful of, to stay on top of who's missing. Because you don't want somebody who decided to come home, got tired of, you know, didn't like it on the street, and all of a sudden everybody's got her picture and she shows up at, you know, the pancake factory and everybody's leaping on her because they think she's still missing, right? So again, it takes a process to go from what we're understanding to how we can effectively engage a community. You know, we're going to have some mistakes along the way, but a process in place that we can be very effective in our own communities, our own backyards, to address this issue, to find those who are being exploited, to be able to recognize them. This next year, we look at fine too in a prevention sense. You hear a lot of these indicators. We started a school assembly program that we launched in New Orleans this year, and we did 56 school events, 41 schools in front of over 25,000 students, and it just went incredibly well to be able to identify these risk factors. We talked about more things than just trafficking. You know, we elevated these other risk factors for students to kind of have a peer intervention approach. Oh, that's what's going on, and it's okay for me to bring this out because I want my friend protected. Went huge. We had girls come forward who've been raped in the last week, being investigated now. Just created a safe forum and again, a flow of information to get help for those who are being exploited. The Attorney General of New Jersey just this last week had called and they have tagged our coalition to do the outreach, but they want to put that school assembly program in front of over 500,000 kids in New Jersey in the weeks leading up to the Super Bowl this year to be able to talk about these things. That's the one place again where we can really, maybe our education departments or wherever, find creative ways that we can get in and communicate effectively. You know, just getting into a school of junior hires and talking about something doesn't mean we're being effective. You know, to find effective ways, you know, we could be the most dynamic speaker ever, but a room full of 1,000 junior high kids is a daunting task, right? So how do we leverage that? Some of the ways we're doing that in New Jersey this next year is trying to have major forums on our university campuses where the students are all coming in on a field trip to go to this particular assembly, so we can have 5,000 to 10,000 kids at a pop from one location, and then utilize those campuses as well to be able to, you know, plug our students in, our college students in, to effective ways to build relationships with these students where we have time.
I'm gonna give you a couple minutes for it.
All right.
So what we're gonna do is actually take a couple questions, and then we're gonna get to the soap labeling project, which Mike is gonna explain. And then at that point, if you wanna ask more questions about our labeling, so feel free to. Is there any couple questions right now, anybody has?
Can you talk about recidivism, about girls that you work with who then go back, and how what you've learned from them?
They all go back.
They all do.
I don't know what recidivism, it's a long process, so it's just a matter of how well connected you can stay to them over a longer period of time, so.
Right, it's hard to get them because, you know, they make a ton of money doing, you know, soliciting. And to take them out and be like, you should go to school and get a job at McDonald's making $8.25. They look at you like, why? I could go make $1,000. Granted, they don't get to keep any of the money, but they're looking at me like, you're crazy. I could go make a ton of money right now. So it's luckily with our program specifically, you work with them to try to help build their confidence, build their self-worth, get them a job, get them in school, make them realize their opportunities. But it's so hard because they just want to go back. You know, they believe that pimp loves them. They believe that they can make money. So they all go back, but they all go back, but hopefully by the time they're done with all the services that we try to get them in place, they realize that there's more better things for them
Australia to go back. They don't all go back.
They don't all, no, they don't all, they go back, but then they come, you know what I mean? They go back and then they, for a minute, like they like relapse kind of, I guess.
Yeah.
And then they realize, no, I don't actually want to do this. So they don't all go back, but they do relapse and then they come back.
Yeah. So, because it's like quitting smoking, so every time you intervene, you give them a few more skills, and by the end, they do get out. And some of the girls who've been through the youth advocate program now speak and help other girls, and we learn a lot from them and how to get out more so than us telling them what to do. But it is a very slow process that involves failure.
That's the better way to put it.
Any other quick questions?
You mentioned like the boom in like the oil industry. That I know I work in Atlanta, and so from what I understand, after the Olympics, that's when there was a huge boom in Atlanta with sex trafficking. So I'm just wondering if some make other examples of other things to kind of be watchful for, kind of be mindful of. Sometimes obviously things happen that and it'll get closer to home.
Yeah, well, Atlanta's always had a problem. They're one of the, if you put Portland, Vegas, Atlanta, New Orleans, Miami, those are kind of the places for that. But again, I think we have to start with the assumption that it's happening in our community. When we first came back, it was easy in Southern Asia to go in Mumbai and see 100,000 girls in a district, right, being exploited. It was easy to see it. It wasn't easy to engage it, to know creatively how to get somebody out of that situation. Here, it was everywhere, and the government was saying basically victims, sex traffic victims are hidden in plain sight. It's a matter of being made more aware of what's going on. But as Dr. Kennedy said, if we're in a college town already, we can already begin to talk about that it is happening. It's just a matter of what it looks like, what form it takes. If you're in Sacramento, California, big sex trafficking area, but also big farm area, a lot of labor stuff going on up there as well. Sturgis is a big event, obviously. Sturgis Rally in South Dakota. Anytime you bring a big influx of people, which is what Vegas does all the time, you increase. That's why the Super Bowl, why we focus on the Super Bowl, it allows us to put into play who's really interested in engaging this locally. How can we put some resources in their hands and create a process to which, when the Super Bowl's long gone, they know how to engage this issue. But anytime you bring a lot of money into a community, whether it's a long-term prospect, like the oil probably isn't going away anytime soon, or it's a short period of time, like a conference, a sporting event. Just because it's a sporting event doesn't mean trafficking is going to happen, because sporting events bring hornier people in. It's just more a matter of pimps being sexual entrepreneurs. Where there's disposable income, we're going to try to get a piece of that, right? When there's increased alcohol, when there's increased other things, you create more likelihood that you're going to be able to profit from that. Or even girls themselves. When we were in Miami, we had girls being exploited, but we also had graduate students from Berkeley who flew themselves in for the weekend thinking they'd make 15, 20 grand over a couple days. And they actually didn't like the streetwalkers out there because they were cutting into their own money. But again, it was how those girls were perceived even amongst themselves that created problems.
We don't have much
soap, and
time.
then we can keep talking while the soap's happening if you want.
So we have a few minutes, so we're gonna real quickly explain the project, and then we have the soap in the back. You can just take some soap and bring it to your chair and label as much as possible. The next session, we have a little bit of a time gap, so if you can stay a few minutes extra, how about the great, if not, we understand.
All right. So the idea of soap, real briefly, as you guys, by the way, this is Carissa and Elaine. Elaine came from Clemson. Carissa came from George Mason. They're graduates. We do a Give a Year program here. College students from University of Arizona, from what you heard there, from Virginia Tech, raise their funds, and they come work with us for a year, different parts of the country once they graduate, and kind of learn the different skills, both in the outreach and the aftercare side, that we put them on the ground. But they're handing out soap. We have them all packaged in soap. Soap was one of the ways we used to engage Indianapolis, especially with kind of the no-tell motel places. There was a friend of mine, her name was Teresa, who was a survivor of trafficking. And when she was being trafficked, when she came out, she was trying to find a way, how can I connect to the girls when they're least accessible to me, She was remembering the time she was being trafficked, and the only time her pimp really left her alone was in between, you know, the tricks that were brought her way while she was cleaning up in the bathroom. So this idea of using soap as a creative way to get information in the hands of possible victims came out of that. So when we did our trainings in the motels, one of the things we offered into Indianapolis was a soap product that they would use the bars of soap, but we would have tagged on there some of the red flags of trafficking and the hotline number that girls could access, or somebody down the hall could access if they say, hey, this is happening in 3B. We work with Polaris on this project to be able to make that happen. Now, soap isn't the only way we approach hospitality outreach. You know, we use key cards, we've used all sorts, you know, do not disturb signs, different things like that. But soap has become fairly effective. We did almost 50,000 bars of soap in the Indianapolis motels in different areas. But we began to use it more in this community as a way to build relationships, again, with business owners who are at the front line of seeing what might be happening. Especially kind of the no-tell motel places. They're trying to, you know, they might be owned by different people every year and a half. You know, somebody new owns them because it's hard to keep up with the business. And so to provide free product to them, which is bars of soap, although they come tagged with human trafficking, becomes a great value because we build a relationship then with that business owner, and they're happy to not only distribute the soap because it's free, but once they begin to build relationships with us, they trust us with the information they're going to pass our way to get help to those that they call in about. And so you guys are going to help us a little bit just by helping us tag, you know, little red flag stickers onto the soap that we're going to be using in some of the kind of, again, the no-tell motels, off the beaten path, places where a lot of times girls are working out of. And so that's what you're doing. But over the course of that, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if anybody's campus is like mine, but Kotex and everybody else wants to give you 5 million samples that we can't give away by any means on our campus. So if you don't have the money to buy these little soaps to give away, maybe you could buy the stickers and put them on those Kotex.
That's great.
And give those to your, because I mean maybe these, you know, and the pimps are probably less likely to look at the Kotex.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So-
those are always creative ways that people who do outreach try to do to connect with the girls, right? You only have a certain amount of time if you're doing direct outreach to communicate. So we've used chapstick, we've used different things that look like everyday product, but actually, you know, 3-4 weeks when she's gotten a few extra beatings, grows weary of this, we have a way for her to call and get out. And so always finding creative ways to do that.
Why don't we do it? Why don't we go to the back, maybe you can stay, help label soap, and then we can ask questions to Mike and myself. I just want to give time for actually to start this project. We want to do that. So I think there's some soap in the back there, some labels. If you want to kind of all huddle back there, you have to go. Show me you understand. If not, please stay around.
No, that's okay, I get it. Let me say a couple quick things that might work with the campus too, and we'll answer questions, but just like you said at the beginning of the year, all these companies come in and give free samples of everything because they're trying to reel everybody in. That was my favorite time when I worked on the campus a year, you know, I could get deodorant for the next 2.5 years and not have to pay for it kind of deal. If you're in a community that already has a great task force or provided services locally, to be able to, you know, do some drives like that for gift bags or whatever, for immediate connections with, you know, girls who need those products. That's one of the things we find with working with those who are being brought out is they don't have anything. And, you know, we've got a couple things we're developing here. We've been given 300 suitcases that are gently used from flight attendants that we're going to be filling with gift cards so that when we work with Vice or whatever, we can, you know, provide them suitcase and, you know, gift cards so they can get some clothes and personal items they need to fill in that. Those are the type of things students could really, you know, a weekend of a drive like that, knowing what they need, could provide big benefits to local service providers like what you would have locally. And that would work with domestic abuse shelters or anything, but